Oh, wow. We get cheers? That's more audience interaction than I ever get. Can I have your attention, please? I love it. My name's Steve Steger. I'm from 9 News. I am very excited to be here with Wes. We're going to do a Q&A in just a little bit, but I want to bring up Wes's boss. He's got some bad news. No, I'm just kidding. Marty Dunn, come on up.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to everybody kind of for being here and sharing kind of this important, exciting event with us. And you've freaked me out a little bit with the term boss. That's not a term that we use in academia very much, for better, for worse. So again, on behalf of the College of Engineering, Design, and Computing at CU Denver, couldn't be more happy to have you with us in kind of this exciting event, which is, by the way, to the best of my knowledge, the first book signing that we've ever done in our college. So I want to start and congratulate Wes on the publication of this very important and sure to be impactful book. My colleagues and I are very proud of Wes, kind of, as well as his students and his colleagues that he's worked with over many years in his research and his teaching that have shaped his thinking and kind of driven him to kind of dig into the details that he's going to describe in his wonderful book. And what a provocative title, Killed by a Traffic Engineer. I should do my due diligence and invite you to share your thoughts and experiences with the book, kind of on social media and the event on social media, kind of with the hashtag, hashtag Killed by a Traffic Engineer. To me, even more provocative than the title's the byline, Shattering the Delusion that Science Underlies Our Transportation System. Wow. So in this book, Wes invites you to jump in with him in his journey to discover how our transportation systems were created and how they're designed today. And he shares some of the fundamental flaws that exist kind of in this space. And he challenges you to join him kind of in a movement to transform transportation and put people and their safety at the center of kind of our transportation systems. And there's much to talk about kind of with regard to this book, but I'm going to leave that to Wes and Steve. But I do want to just share a thought first. And that's in academia, and Wes has been a professor, he's worked in industry, and he has a kind of tremendous amount of experience. But in academia, we put a lot of effort. I think everybody realizes that we teach, and fewer folks realize that we do research. And in fact, it's about 50% of our job, kind of as professors of research institutions. And even that, very few folks really realize what research means and what that all is. And the prevailing paradigm that we have with regard to our research is in many ways along two dimensions, kind of the intellectual merit of our research and the broader impact of our research. And the efforts on intellectual merit kind of show up in new papers, new studies that to first order are meant to influence a particular research community and a body of researchers kind of within that community. And those communities themselves kind of shape and advance knowledge kind of over time. Broader impacts, as I mentioned, are more elusive. It's the idea that behind our academic research, there's broad societal impact. And in fact, impact beyond a particular research group and research groups in general. And expanding the broader impact of our research is a strategic priority of our college. And I can think of no better example of that kind of than what we're gathered here for tonight, is to celebrate kind of Wes's book and the broader impact of that, where he calls for a dramatic transformation of transportation. And in his first chapter, kind of he invites kind of readers, and I'll quote, he says, "You don't need to be a traffic engineer or a transportation planner or any kind of expert to read this book and join the cause." And in the book, Wes shows you and invites you to join the cause. And I encourage and invite you to do so as well. Thank you. So another way we broaden the impact of our research is through education of future generations of students. And Wes has a lot to say about this in his book too. But I'm especially proud that Wes not only talks the talk, but he walks the walk. And if you look around the room, you'll see information about our new human-centered transportation certificate master's program that Wes and his colleagues across our college and in the College of Architecture and Planning at CU Denver kind of have created. And this program educates tomorrow's transportation engineers kind of with, again, humans and their safety at the center. Again, a major premise of Wes's book. So I join Wes and his colleagues in inviting you as, you know, as interested kind of folks to join our programs and explore them and engage with them. So before I kind of turn it over to Steve and Wes, I want to thank kind of our fantastic staff in our college, and in particular, kind of Tammy, Katie, Leo, and Ram, who have put this event together. So please join me in a loud round of applause. And with that, I'm going to hand the microphone back to Steve in the main event.
Thank you so much. Marty Dunn, everyone. You ready for this?
Yeah,
Feeling good?
I'm feeling great.
How many of you know Wes Marshall? I got to know Wes when I started reporting on streets a little bit more at 9 News. We wanted to take a broader look at kind of some of the systemic issues with Vision Zero, problems that the city has been battling for a really, really long time. And Wes was recommended to me as someone who could explain these issues in a way that everybody would understand. And I knew it from the minute I first talked to him that he would be a great resource for our reporting, has been ever since. And we've been talking about this book for a while now, just off camera.
Yes.
How does it feel to have it done?
It's funny because I think I mentioned this to you probably 4 years ago. And then when we talked again, like a year later, you asked me like a very specific question that I had sort of mentioned a year before. And I think that's why I invited you back to do this. So thank you.
I pay attention sometimes. It's true. Well, let's get into this. First of all, are there any traffic engineers in the house? So, I didn't realize they'd be here, Wes.
I'm one of them.
I was hoping for a more friendly audience. So the book, the title is incredibly provocative. Killed by a traffic engineer. You're talking about this science that has built this field of research, a field of traffic engineering for years. What inspired you to call it that?
I've known the title for 10 plus years. Like that was sort of in the bank. And I will say, I'm not trying to blame traffic engineers at all. Like I'm really trying to say that they're doing what they were taught. And as a young traffic engineer, you know, I only took one class in transportation engineering. Somehow I got my professional engineering license in this. I still only had one class under my belt. And I really didn't know what I didn't know until I went back and got my master's and PhD. And there was so much, and it was shocking to me how much there was that wasn't taught to me. So I was just given these 1,000-page manuals, and you have to rely on them. Like you just do what they say. You don't know enough to think outside that box. So a lot of the crashes we see, we blame on human error or randomness, and they're systematic. There's something we can predict, so we should be able to fix them.
It's striking, excuse me, it's striking when you actually report on this day to day and you see how often the human error is played into this. Because when you talk to police officers after a crash, or you talk to the public information officer, they will very quickly let you know who was at fault in a crash and what went wrong. Very rarely do they talk about, well, maybe it's because the speed limit's too fast on this road, or maybe it's because the road is built too wide and people speed on the road. What is it about the science that needs reworking?
Well, there's a lot of things, but I mean, I think that is a good start, right? Because we all want a data-driven approach to fixing the safety problem. But our data is all telling us we have a human error problem. The police go out there for one reason, to figure out which of these people is at fault. They're not looking at the system that led to these things. So the speeding example you gave, if we build a really wide road that entices people to speed, and then they speed, it's easy just to blame them and say, we need to educate them or enforce the rules better. But at the same time, we could build roads that self-enforce. Like we could build streets where you don't need a jaywalk because we actually put a safe place to cross. Like there's so much in that vein, and we can pawn off most of the crashes as human error, but it takes the hook off of us as traffic engineers to do any better.
One of the things I look at now, anytime I report on a crash, is especially if it was a pedestrian crash, and it's somebody crossing the road outside of a marked crosswalk, which is something that the police often tell you happened, is how far away the closest crosswalk is for that person, and how long it would take for that person to maneuver from that point to a different point to get from point A to point B. Just something, an anecdote I thought I would share.
Yeah, well, and then if you look at, we don't even provide sidewalks from between where they are and that crosswalk. And like we placed the bus stop here and their apartment building is right across the street. Like they're doing a very rational thing, but then we blame them when they get hit. And we didn't provide them a safe place to cross. So it's easy for traffic engineers to say, hey, like we need to educate them. Or you see some cities like putting up fences to keep pedestrians from crossing there. But we can provide safer streets and safer places to cross.
I know you've been saying this stuff for years. When you mention this to traffic engineers who maybe are stuck in that mindset, what's the reaction?
Most of them are on board. Like they're thankful that this is coming out because they also know they have the same sort of feelings I have, that there's less behind a lot of what we're doing than what we've been taught. So I think most of them are, I mean, a few people have taken exception with the title, like they feel like I'm blaming them, but I was like, if you can get past the title and read the book, I think you'll agree with me that what's happening is more pervasive and systemic than just putting the onus on you.
Traffic engineers in the room, you don't feel like he's blaming you, do you? Just want to clear that up.
Little bit.
Okay, just a tad. I'm struck by how much research you did for this book, because the point that I made to you the year later after you and I were discussing it was the Studebaker reference, the idea about vehicle miles traveled. Yes, it stuck with me because it was something. The car industry's influence on the way traffic laws and traffic rules and traffic engineering was. What enlighten us on that?
I mean, big picture, I was trying to go down these rabbit holes to figure out why we do what we do. Like I felt like it wasn't enough just to say, here's what we do that's wrong, here's how we can do it better. Like I really wanted to understand and get the voices. So I was looking at papers in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And for a little bit, I thought I was going crazy because I had literally 1,000 pages of notes. Then I read something Robert Caro had done and made me feel better about myself because he was way beyond that. But that one speaks to how we just measure safety. Like we want to measure a crash rate. So there's like the number of crashes or fatalities or injuries is the numerator. The denominator is typically VMT. So that's vehicle miles traveled. So there's two ways to get safety. One is to have fewer crashes. The other is to drive more. So if we drive more, we seem safer. I was like, where did that come from? And I found out that the president of Studebaker in the 1930s, like he made the right point. We need an exposure metric. And then he just picked the one he liked best that would make cars look safer for the foreseeable future. 15 years later, we codified it nationally in the Highway Act, and we've been using it ever since. And if you actually think about what this leads us to, which I go through in the book, it logically doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. It leads us to building places that entice more driving than those that are actually safer.
How much of that engineering and that mindset do you think attributes to car brain among drivers? Because I think so many drivers are so dead set in ways. I made a point about a neighborhood road, and I think Tim was involved in this conversation near me about how wide this road was, and people couldn't figure out why people were speeding. And then when you start to talk about like, well, maybe if you narrow the road down a little bit, all of a sudden you hear from a lot of people who say, well, that's going to make me move slower, and it's going to move traffic to another road, and it's just a cavalcade of problems beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some problems in that vein. At the same time, I would argue that most people don't like know any differently. Like a lot of people have never lived in a place where anything but a car is an option. And the first time I moved to a place where I couldn't leave my street without a car, it drove me insane because as a kid, I could walk or bike all over town. I could take the bus to like Harvard Square in Boston. And my neighbors didn't know any differently though. I was like, how do you like chauffeur your kids over town? How do you like, I see a corner store, but we can't get there without a car. And they're like, well, just drive there. Like, what do you mean? Like, so I don't think a lot of people have seen examples of what it could be like. So I'm bringing it back to us, the traffic engineers. We need to build those places to give more of a supply of these good places that people can experience that.
Are we too far gone? Have we built the system too much in the old way to do it the new way?
Not at all. Like, there's so much we can do. I mean, even now we have an affordable housing crisis. So, we need more housing. We know, like, there's some research that shows how much we're going to be building over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And about half of our urban areas are still yet to be built in that sort of short time span. So you think we're sort of done in a lot of ways, but I don't think we're even close to it. So not only that, but we can also improve what we built. Like, there are ways to get better. We know a lot of times how to do it. It's just, we need to start pushing in that direction.
Knowing that only a few of us have had a copy of this book, and I have a child and I've read some of it, I promise. A new child, 10 weeks old, I promise. I'm trying to read it.
Thank you for staying awake.
I'm here. I'm trying. What's the reaction from folks so far to this book? I mean, do you see this changing the way that traffic engineering is done for years?
Well, I mean, somebody joked that I don't want to judge a book by its cover, but I like this cover. Like, at the same time, those that got an early copy like you have said good things. So I haven't heard anything bad. At the same time, I don't think anyone's going to be coming to me directly to say that. And I think not being on social media insulates me from a lot of that stuff. So with that, I have to rely on folks like you to spread the word, because I can't always do so myself. And a lot of you have been great doing so far. So people know about this. Like, I mean, to step back for a second, I was at Second and Charles over the weekend, and you're looking around, there's, like 30 million books in that store. It's like, how does any book get any attention at all? And you look online at people, like, their first book, they have their first book signing, and literally no one shows up. So I am very fortunate that you all are here, that you all care about these issues, that Steve is starting to read this book, even though he's exhausted. So it's amazing, like, and all of you coming here, like the faculty, Marty and Tammy and Katie, for running this party. My mom showing up is important. My wife.
Mom's here?
Yes, my mom.
A hand for Wes's mom. You raised a good one.
And my kids are here too, so yeah.
All right. I do want to open it up to questions from the room. I'll ask you the last one.
Yeah.
You're shaping young minds, right? There are young minds coming through your classroom. You're talking to kids.
There's a lot of students here too,
They
so.
want to be traffic engineers. I call them kids because I continue to get older by the minute. What are you noticing in the younger generation of traffic engineers? Are they buying into this? Do they understand the problems that are out there?
Yes. So, I mean, I've been at SU Denver for 15 years now. And when I was talking about this stuff at first, I feel like I was blowing people's mind, but a lot of them are already on board. So now I need to advance the topics to like the next level. So it gets me further ahead in the conversation. A lot of them are ready for this. So that's what's been awesome to see over the years.
It's great. How about a hand for Wes initially? And then I will just hand the microphone out. Go right ahead.
My name is Adrian Brown. I'm a 50-year-old civil engineer.
50-year-old?
50-year practicing civil engineer. You mentioned a great word, and I think it's important: codified.
Yeah.
What's been codified is what everybody in this room and everybody else wanted to have then and probably still wants to have now. Engineers carry out that codification. And so whilst we may have been killed by traffic engineers, I would suggest to you that we've been killed by codification as well. And that's something we can do about. We engineers do what we're told, but we're told by society. Comment.
So I think a lot of those codifications you're talking about, we label them as standards, but they are really guidelines. We always have engineering judgment, the ability to use engineering judgment to do something different. There are ways we can document that and do it better. So yes, there's a lot of stuff you're talking about. We have the power to overrule that and say, we know the empirical research is showing us something different, so we can do something different, but it's sometimes easier not to. It's easier to we're scared of being sued, we're scared of liability, and just use what's sort of in the books. But I think that's too simple and it's sort of led us to the wrong place. We don't want to be in this situation where, thousands, tens of thousands of people die every year in this country.
Plus killed by codification would be tough to convince a publisher. I don't know. Just the thought. Just kidding. All right, we have a microphone over here. Who else has a question? I'll just give this one to you.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's David. Thank you for the book. I'm not a traffic engineer, although I am an engineer. Hypothetically, right, if you had access to a enthusiastic bunch of volunteers, a lot of folks, for example, in the Denver area, if you could wave your magic wand, how would you use such a group of people? What sorts of stuff should well, I mean, because
Yeah.
we do want to get involved. So, I mean, there's that. But rather than simply coming to book signings, which is
Yeah.
a start, because there's beer here.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what would you like to see?
I mean, we are lucky, I think, to live in a place like Denver where there's so many people that care and care deeply about these sort of issues. And I mean, I've seen it and it's been growing for years. People that are going to the meetings and sort of fighting against the codifications, just putting in the standard. So the Denver Bike Lobby and a lot of the folks that are here and groups like that are pushing in the right direction. I think I need to think more deeply about how do we systematically kind of do this, and how do we combine sort of the advocacy world with the research world because a lot of times I try to stay out of the advocacy world. Like, I feel like I'm providing the ammunition to you folks. Like, here's the research, take this and do good things with it. And I can point you in the right direction. So if you're ever in an argument with a traffic engineer and they're telling you like X, Y, and Z, I can say, that's kind of a lie. Like, here's what you can do differently. I can teach you how to argue with them more effectively. And that's oftentimes what I end up doing. So I think we can work together.
At a certain point, before I get to you, June, one other question. How do you get, this is an odd question, how do you get the car industry on board with this? Because I feel like they have a lot of influence in this space.
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of, if you look at the 100 years plus of this, there are some sort of evil things they have done, but at the same time, they're also doing a very rational thing. Like, they're selling big cars because people want big cars, because people live in places where it makes sense to drive a big car, where rationally it makes sense to have a bigger car. Like, so it's a system that we built that is the thing that makes the most sense, right? So I would, again, take a step back and say, we need to build places where that doesn't make sense anymore. And people want to need something different to live their lives, where just having the biggest car is not the most rational decision. But for a lot of people where they live, it is. So it's a tough dynamic. There's also policy things at the national level we can do, where we focus much more on the occupants in the car than the pedestrians or the bicyclists outside. So we could design cars very differently, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Congrats, Wes, on this amazing book. We
Thanks,
are
Jill.
so lucky to have you, a national leading thinker on this issue here in Denver. And so I'd love to hear you say, as somebody who's intimately familiar with Denver, what are we doing right? And what do we need to do better?
My wife will agree that I complain too much. I feel like that's my job as a professor. Like, I look at everything and I was like, how can it be better? But I will say, when NACTA was here, so the National Association of City Transportation Officials, had their conference here in Denver last year. And I was taking tours around the city, like seeing our bike facilities with people from other places. And they were all like, holy crap, this is amazing, right? They were looking at our streets, and for them, it was a moonshot in their city to do what we've already done. And at the same time, I look back 10 years ago, a lot of what we've done was a moonshot here. I look at streets right near here. It's like, oh, there's no way we could take away 3 lanes, have 1 for a bike, 2 for buses. Like, no way Denver could do that. But look around, we've done it. So we're heading in the right direction. At the same time, there's a lot of streets that aren't there yet, because federal, which is not that far from here, and there's still a lot of people dying. There's still so much we could do. I hope things like the BRT could fix it, but there are systematic problems we still need to fix. Like, we know where the high injury network is. We know where people are dying. we can do better. And a lot of it is network. It's easy to kind of look at hotspots. You need to sort of think bigger. If you can't, just because you have a bike lane on one street doesn't mean you can cross the next one. So we need to think about things more holistically, I think. Thanks, Jill.
All right. Professor Marshall, great to see this. I haven't been familiar with your work before, but it's awesome seeing this. I'm looking forward to reading the book. So I'm a policy worker. I do a lot of stuff with politics. And, you know, if sort of this entire field is just based fundamentally on extremely shaky foundations that are fundamentally rotten at their core, then that means we've got an enormous amount of state, federal, and local laws, plus policies, otherwise regulations, all that sort of stuff, which is built on this rotten foundation. So sort of, do you have an idea on what is the most efficient way to navigate out of that, and sort of what's the replacement for those things? How do we get out of this sort of regulatory mire that we're now in?
I mean, so, you know, I've been here for 15 years. I probably have like 75 or 80 like peer-reviewed published papers out there. And I feel like I'm always sort of chipping away the tip of the iceberg, right? The book, the whole point was to attack the foundation, because I don't think a lot of people know what you're saying, that it is a rickety foundation of science. So I really had to dig into those rabbit holes to show like where it is, like the idea that something like wider roads are safer, like has been pervasive for 100 years, but why? Like, what's the original study? When you look at the original study and you look at the widest road they looked at was 24 feet, you're like, oh my God, like, that's why we do that? Like, seriously? So traffic engineers don't know this. Like, we weren't taught this. It literally, I had to go in a cave and kind of dig down to figure out this stuff. So, I mean, I hope that's can help facilitate it, and then combine it with people sharing the good word, so to speak, about this can, I think, lead to what you're suggesting.
Professor Martin, congratulations on the book. I'm a reporter in town. I'm not as good as Steve, but
Oh, he's much better than I am. Trust me.
I was writing a story a month ago on this parking bill that passed at the legislature,
Yeah.
and it's killing minimums near transit in the state's biggest cities. And I called the bill sponsor from Colorado Springs and I say, why do you care about this? Like, how did you get into it? And she said, oh, YouTube, TikTok. Like she kind of got red pilled on YouTube and TikTok. And so I wonder, like, how do you think about your role in digging through papers from 100 years ago and getting everything down to a T, like the Robert Caro role, right?
Yeah.
And someone with a phone and a bunch of followers who can like take what you learn and spread it wider.
Do you do the dances on the TikTok? Can you do anything? No?
Not
So they-
yet.
That's what they do on TikTok, I think.
My kids are more into that than I am, but big picture, I think, I mean, that's why it has to be like a group thing where I do my role, but everyone has a different role to play in what we're all doing. It can't be any single one of us is going to fix this problem, right? So if I can do the research, I can write a book like this and give it like Jonathan Furtig to put it on Twitter and share it in a different way and start doing stuff like that. Like, that's how it gets out there and can affect people that are never, ever going to read a research paper that I wrote, right? But the idea can get out there in a different way, and it might lead them to having the red pill and somehow coming up with a parking bill that's a statewide regulation. I mean, because parking is fundamental to all this too. Like, I talk about this later in the book, but it's hard to separate it all. Like, I think we need to think about things together, but we also need to think about ourselves together and how we can do this in a way that is effective and heading in the right direction.
I think we have a microphone. We have a microphone over there. We are running short on time, although I'm sure we can
My daughter
extend.
wants to ask a question with it.
Oh, your daughter. Yes.
Yes.
Do you do the TikTok? Can you help him with the TikTok?
Yes.
Yeah,
Uh,
okay, if she can. Good, good, good.
I have a very important and related question. Who's your favorite child and why is it your third one?
I'm not gonna let you get away without answering this.
May, what was the second question? I only heard the first one.
Who's your favorite child and why is it the third one?
I think that's where you're leading the witness with that question. I think we need to strike that from the record.
We can strike. Are you sure you don't want to answer? You're just in front of a whole room full of people. Any other questions back there? Because you've got to sign books.
Are we doing it on time?
I mean, we're definitely running late,
Oh,
but that's how I roll. So
Wes, Don Ruggles, I'm an architect at the university. There's a remarkable company in Israel developing a program utilizing AI that's called No Traffic. So it's site-specific sensors at each intersection that feeds information to a master computer that controls the flow of the traffic. And apparently some municipalities have embraced it totally, and it's working remarkably well. I wonder if you have a comment on that?
it's hard because I tell a story in the book. When I was in Australia, I was on sabbatical there back in 2017. I went to a thing called City Talks, and they had different speakers come in. And a guy came from MIT, and he showed this autonomous intersection, and he compared it to a conventional one. In the autonomous one, every car is getting a reservation and sort of going through it instantaneously because they all know where to go. They all know where every other car is. And he declared this the future of urbanism. And he got a standing ovation from like 200 people. I'm like, oh my God, like what happens if there's one pedestrian or one bicyclist or one human driver? It just doesn't work at all. Like it might be the future of the middle of nowhere, but it's not going to be the future of urbanism. So when I think about that, I think we're still asking the wrong question. Like reducing traffic isn't it. Like we're trying to get people to destinations. Like think about accessibility, think about safety. Like those are the priorities. Just reducing congestion, reducing traffic, it can be a way to do that, but it's not the goal. It's more like an objective to get there.
All right, we got one more in the back, right here. If you can hand that microphone up forward, right there. Perfect. Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. My name is Alejandra Castañeda. I'm a pedestrian dignity advocate. And my question to you, in my experience as an advocate and an activist, has been that political will is what's lacking. Not so much the research or, sometimes the funds, but the funds are allocated based on the politics. So how do you think this book will change politicians' minds?
So I agree with you. Yes, political will is definitely a big part of it, but I'll tell you a story. When I first got here, so this is maybe around 2009 or 10, Denver just hired their first ped and bike planner, like one person to do this. I met with her for coffee, and I had just come back from a conference in Portland. They had these bike boulevards, like neighborhood greenways, like all over the city, and their grid was similar to ours. It's like, oh, this would work so perfectly for Denver. And when I said that to her, she said, oh, you sound just like the mayor. He wants to do this through Park Hill. So this was Mayor Hickenlooper at the time. I was like, well, if the mayor wants to do it, why can't we do it? Like, what's the holdup? And she's like, well, Public Works won't let me. Like, it was like even the mayor, so they had the political will, but we didn't have the engineers signing off to say we could do this in the street. They were worried about the liability. They were about other issues. So political will is very important, but it's not the only thing. So it needs to be all of it.
All right, we'll take one more. I saw your hand go up, and you're a Steve, so I like Steve.
Many kudos to you and actually Channel 9 for giving time and space to
Yes,
science and
thank you, Steve.
engineering. And to the very provocative title, making this kind of thing into pop culture. That's amazing. So I love it. Steve Fisher, I'm a graduate from 2014, UC Denver. Question is maybe a thought exercise. So you got to help out the audience with this acronym, and I probably have it wrong. If you took MUTCD, the code.
The Manual and Uniform Transportation
That's it.
Control Device.
That's it.
Yeah.
And took your book, would you insert in all the chapters, or would it just be tacked on at the end? And if any of those above, would it take federal, like legislative action, or how would that come about?
So I mentioned engineering. Good to see you again, Steve. It's been a while. I mentioned engineering judgment before, and the MUTCD that That is probably the most standard like of all of them are guidelines, and that is more towards a standard because we obviously can't make our stop signs green. At the same time, I counted up in that book, there's 167 times they use the phrase engineering judgment. So we like a lot of times you hear an engineer say, we can't do this crosswalk because we don't meet the warrant. Yes, that is sort of their guidelines, but we can always use engineering judgment to overrule that when it's near a school or where it's near a park or whatever it might be. So I'm not sure where it goes in the order of things, but like we can't just rely on that as like a standard or manual. Like we need to still treat it as a guideline that we can use our brain and do things better.
And with that, how about a hand for Wes Marshall? How's your arm feeling? You ready to go sign some books?
It feels weird to do that, but yes, I can do that.
All right, why don't you tell folks where they can get the book? Make sure it's all up there.
So you can get a couple down here. The school bought about 70 of them to give out, so you can do that. But it's also everywhere. So Island Press is my publisher, so you can get it on their website. And if you do use I think promo code Marshall, you can save 20% on their website. It's also on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I know a lot of people that have ordered it from their local independent bookstore, so that works too.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. We're gonna go sign books, or you're gonna go sign books.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Get it off.